All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. It is Friday the 5th, April. So glad to have an opportunity to talk to you. And I call the Friday programs usually the free-for-all, and I did that again today. It's in the thumbnail. If you go to YouTube, and hopefully you're a subscriber to Halitics. I really hope you are. I want to build up the channel. I think what's important is to make a difference. And the way we make a difference, obviously, is by talking to each other, reaching as many as possible, and promoting what I believe is a truly progressive agenda, pushing for a society where all have enough, but nobody has too much. And we can debate, obviously, on the margins what's enough and what's too much. I'm sure there'd be plenty of disagreement, but I think we kind of can agree enough is at least a place to sleep every night where you're safe, secure, food, clothing, and shelter obviously are the bare minimum. I think we would add education, culture, meaningful, remunerative employment. We can go on and on. I'm not going to focus on that today on the free-for-all. I always hope folks will call me, especially on Fridays, 240-242-5646. And today I'm going to do things a little bit differently than I've done in the past. Kind of a focus, not exclusive, but a focus on what is in today's Washington Post A section. So pretty much, at least for the first word in the Washington Post A. And let me explain why a little bit. This sort of jumped into my head as something to do because my phone, my smartphone, cell phone, whatever you want to call it, my Google Pixel 5a, which I actually have to say is probably the best of those smartphones, you know, the ones that are basically little computers that I've had, just stopped working completely. The display froze, and then it, when I tried to reboot it, it would not. At least I could not see a display. It apparently does reboot, but you can't see it. The display is completely shot. I'm not sure it can be repaired. I took it over to U-Break, iFix, and I'm hoping they'll be able to repair the unit because I really, really, really don't want to buy another one, and I'm even considering not doing so. I think I'll have to, and I may get into why I might have to in a little bit. But because I don't have that smartphone, and it's not the only reason, because I usually work on my laptop or on my desktop computer where I broadcast from. But this morning, rather than getting a start on the headlines, which I often do while I'm in bed, as I'm waking up, I look through my apps, my Washington Post app, usually even before the Washington Post, the New York Times app. We'll talk about the Times too a little bit, but this program is more about the Post. But I often get going on the news of the day through my phone. But I don't have a phone available to me that will provide me with that information. So I started reading the newspaper, the actual hard copy, which we get. I have told my wife, I'm happy if you want to get it. We can certainly, that's fine. Let's get it if that's what you want. But I have generally eschewed in recent years reading the newspaper in its hard copy, or it's kind of a weird way to say hard since it's paper, but in the actual solid version. There we go. Let's get that subscribe button for you full. Yeah, please do subscribe if you can. Bottom right, you see the Halitics in blue and white. So I actually stopped really reading hard copy newspapers when I was in Monterey 10 years ago. I was just sick of having to go out and pick it up off the street or off the driveway, really, and just get all the articles that I wanted on my computer. So without the app, though, I decided to really go through the paper closely. And there's a lot of really interesting stories. Just today's paper, we'll actually look at one story that was published a few days ago, but we'll start with the front page above the fold. Biden warns Netanyahu the situation in Gaza is unacceptable. We covered this story yesterday. Bibi and Joe Biden talking for the first time in months because Biden's so apparently upset, certainly presenting himself as irate, furious about the targeting And I know there have been some coverage. I think the New York Times called it accidental, but I think pretty much everyone gets that Israel deliberately murdered those 7 aid workers who were in the Jose Andres humanitarian mission. And Gaza, obviously, is being eradicated by Israel. This is just one more example. Any aid even being presented to the victims of the Israeli Defense Forces, as they're so called, are targeted. So Joe Biden, obviously angry about this, or at least presenting himself as angry, talking to Netanyahu. And here's a story about it. The president said U.S. policy will change, not has changed or we're changing it now, but will change if you don't immediately take specific, concrete, and measurable steps to address the disaster. And apparently they did take some steps. This isn't from the paper, but I heard that there's going to be some consequences for the people who were involved in the operation. I don't know if that will satisfy Biden. It obviously shouldn't. We should have stopped providing any aid whatsoever to Israel years ago, whatever. I mean, you choose your time frame, but certainly once the bombing and the reprisals began in October, at the very, very, very latest, all support to Israel, certainly all military support, should have ended. But as you can see, and again, we're going through today's headlines in today's Washington Post, at a couple days before this riot act reading by Joe Biden to Netanyahu, the U.S. had approved more bombs to Israel. This was on the day of the World Central Kitchen strikes. The Biden administration signed off on thousands more bombs, despite global condemnation. So it all rings incredibly hollow. Anyone who says, oh, well, Joe Biden really cares about the Gazans and he really doesn't support what Israel's doing, and the Democratic Party is the humanitarian party, they're the peace party. It's complete BS. It's a load of crap. The meeting with Netanyahu, and I'm going to provide some video support for this proposition I'll give, it's clear, and if it's needed, if it's necessary, just a PR stunt. Purely designed to try to keep a few Muslim voters, a few pro-Palestine voters, a few voters like myself, who are absolutely horrified by the Biden administration policy, tried to keep a few of us within the Democratic tent. That's the only reason whatsoever. The policy has not changed, and there may be some cosmetic. I'll be totally frank with you. It is an election year. If the Biden team, the re-election team, thinks it needs to, it may make some cosmetic changes. It may speak more forcefully. Maybe there'll be a very public repudiation of Israel. Maybe even they'll delay some inessential supplies to Israel. But the policy supporting the genocide won't. The only way that will change is if we just don't vote for them. If we stop voting for candidates who support the Holocaust. It has to, and we have to vote for someone else. And that would be, I guess, Jill Stein, right? I mean, RFK Jr. is all in for it. I haven't heard one word from Cornel West. He had an opportunity to build a movement. He just completely, threw it in the toilet. That opportunity he had to lead in the Green Party, he threw it in the trash heap. So Jill Stein's our only hope. And you can see why we need hope, because with the current administration, which signed off on thousands more bombs on the day that Israel killed those 7 workers, people who were trying to help. Just, not even stop Israel. It wasn't about a military operation. was just, let's give some food to a few of the 1 million+ Gazans that Israel is starving to death. More from today's Washington Post. The centrist group No Labels won't field a ticket in the presidential election. They haven't identified candidates with a credible path to winning the White House. Well, they don't need to. They already have a centrist, right? I mean, Joe Biden's the perfect candidate. They're, and this is so frustrating because I thought I had a picture, but from this particular article, they show a picture of Joe Manchin, because he's someone they were considering. Also, the former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, who is beloved by many in the center, and very popular, by the way, in my state, Maryland. And he's really pretty much the same as the current governor. There's some differences on the edges, but they're pretty similar. Why would you need? You don't need. If you're No Labels, you've got your centrist. And his name is Joe Biden. So, of course, they're not going to field anyone. It's bizarre. It's, look, Hillary Clinton, I don't have the video. I'm not going to show it because, we see enough of her. But, telling people, get over yourself. Vote for Joe Biden. What do you mean you don't like your choices? What do you mean they're too old? What do you mean that they don't necessarily represent the totality or even close the diverse opinions in the United States, that we have two choices that most people don't like? Her response, get over it. Well, Hillary Clinton is the ultimate, I don't even want to call it, she's center right? I mean, I don't know. She's a neoliberal. She believes in addressing American problems, the problems facing American people, with private solutions, for-profit solutions. That is the essence of No Labels. When it comes to foreign policy, Hillary Clinton believes in a muscular, aggressive, pro-war, interventionist foreign policy, one that's been absolutely destructive to us and to everybody else. It's pretty much the same as Joe Biden's. It's what No Labels believes. No Labels doesn't want limits on fossil fuel production, expansion, use. That's Joe Biden. Why? There's your friend Joe Manchin right there from No Labels. Why would you need a No Labels candidate when we've, party candidate, when we've already got the ultimate No Labels candidate running for president? He is the president. No Labels is completely large and in charge. There's zero reason to even contemplate if you're, and this is a group that's funded by Wall Street behemoths, the billionaire class. They've got their president. They don't need anybody but Joe Biden, and they've got him. So I was interested that they aren't running anybody. And they don't say that. They don't say, oh, well, we're perfectly happy with Joe Biden. They just said we couldn't find anybody that has a shot at winning. Obviously, they're not going to say we're happy with Joe Biden. If they said they were happy with Joe Biden, they might actually undermine Joe Biden's possible chances to win, because most people don't like No Labels. Most people realize it's a load of crap. But if Bernie were running, oh, you can guarantee. And this is not a pay-in to Bernie by any means. But he's better, he's not as bad as what we have right now. All right, I wanted to get to one more story here from today's Washington Post, and then we're going to get to Annelle Sheline. I may not go the full hour. It seems like we're moving along. Actually, there's more than one more Post story. We'll get to, there's one towards the, it's like, and this is all, by the way, from the A section. So the front page section of the Post. I didn't go into, the style or the sports or any of that. I could have, but I really, and to be positive here. I think these are, really, they're important stories, and they're covering the news really well, right? Aren't they? I mean, that's an interesting story about no labels, and it's purely factual. They're not providing any spin. They're just saying, hey, this group, these so-called self-described centrists, the no labels people, they decided not to run a candidate. It's very interesting, actually. And my analysis of it is, why would they? They got a great candidate. They got the president right now. Wall Street owns the White House. Wall Street owns Congress. The minority leader, the Democratic leader, is completely captured by Wall Street, Hakeem Jeffries. The Republicans, they got Mitch McConnell leading them in the Senate. He's never met a deal that Wall Street didn't like, that he hasn't support. He supports every deal that Wall Street likes. Let me phrase it that way. So no labels runs the whole country. They're in complete control. They're in complete charge. Why would they have any problems with where we are right now? Really good stories juxtaposed. On the front page, Joe Biden reading the Riot Act to Bibi, and at the same breath, or basically having already signed off on more bombs. So the Post doing a real good job covering the news. And when people are very, very, me and among them, skeptical of the media and why and their motives, and the paper's owned by the richest. Well, I don't know, is Musk the richest, or is Bezos? One or the other is the richest man in the world, richest person in the world. And this newspaper is owned by Jeff Bezos, one of the two richest people in the world. So he's got his own agenda, but he's providing really important information. And I'm glad he is. I'm glad he's willing to spend his money. It would be much better if we had much less wealth and income inequality, and newspapers were, considered a vital place for small businesses and in cities to advertise as they used to be. And that's how they were able to thrive and survive. But that's not what we have right now, sadly. I thought this was a really interesting opinion piece by Ruth Marcus. I don't like Ruth Marcus. I disagree with much of what she has to say. She's kind of a no labels person herself. But she does go to Israel. She does tell you about what it's like. And she gives you a view of Israel that I think is important that we discuss a little bit, because it provides insight into what Israelis, at least a certain group, the people she spoke to, are feeling, and what many American Jews feel too. And, those are their feelings. And I've always said feelings are never wrong. You're allowed to feel however you want. The problem is when you act on those feelings, when you pursue policies or engage in behaviors based on feelings, not facts, or you respond to your feelings, your emotions, in ways that ultimately are going to make you feel worse. And that's what we see from this article. So very interesting, Marcus, the mournful. And, this was, I mentioned to you that I really wanted to, and I'm going to do something like, Limbaugh used to do this, where he'd make noises. Let me see. I want to get my newspaper. So my actual hard copy, because the Post has different headlines. The content, the actual editorial content, is identical in the newspaper as it is online. The virtual edition is the same as the real edition, the literal edition. But they use different headlines. And frankly, I really liked the Washington Post headline, and that's in the newspaper. And I was hoping that I would take a picture of it and share it, and I would juxtapose the two for you. But I mentioned my phone is not working right. It's on the fritz, so I didn't have could have taken a picture with something else, I suppose, but I didn't do it. So you're stuck now just with what the virtual edition shows, and it's not what my hard copy of the Post says, and I can't really activate it. They're interesting, though, the different headline. So I'm thinking maybe I actually have to get that phone back, because there are some real benefits in terms of taking pictures, scanning and the like. My car app that's on the phone is useful. It's not essential, but it's useful. So Marcus talking about how hard it is for the Israelis. And, I get it. She's Jewish. Her name's Marcus. She's Jewish. But to me, I'm not tribal. I'm just thinking about people. So she puts her, and that's how most people are, I think. She's concerned about her tribe, the people in her tribe, and her tribe is Jewish people. And I just take a few paragraphs from it because it's very interesting what's going on there. So it's kind of a little bit out of place, right? Out of context. But what she says, some protesters are actually blocking aid convoys, Gaza. So it's not just the government. There actually are Islamophobes, Palestinian haters, I don't know what you want to call them, who are trying to stop aid from going into Gaza. And you're always going to have a few haters. But this is even worse. An overwhelming majority of Israeli Jews say the suffering of civilians in Gaza should only be taken into account to a small extent, or not at all. So to me, this is what part of the human condition. People are scared. People are made to feel as though they're victims. And let me say, the Israeli Jews are not victims. Yes, there were victims of a terrorist attack, but they are not victims now. They are not under terror attack now. They are the ones who have been terrorizing. Their country is the terrorist country. They are victims to the extent that they individual innocent Israeli Jews have been victimized. It is because their country, their nation, is pursuing an oppressive, cruel, ethnic-based, religious-based targeting of other people. That's why Israelis are now under threat. And you can talk all you want about how it's because they're Jews and because of this and because of that. The fact is that if Israel treated every member, every resident within its borders with respect, with decency, given human rights, they were economically secure. If that were the case, Israel would not be targeted right now. Israel and Israelis would be safe. But Israel isn't doing that. Israel's stealing land from Palestinians, from Muslims. Israel is treating Palestinians and Muslims like second-class citizens at best, if they are citizens at all. Israel is now committing a genocide in Gaza. And that is why Israelis aren't safe. I get how they feel to the extent that they aren't safe, which is far, far, far safer than the people that they're destroying, eradicating. And Ruth Marcus, though, she understands how they feel. She gets it. Oh, she says, to witness how close the public feels to the hostages, she says, is to understand the imperative to do whatever it takes to bring them home now, even if that means inflicting suffering on other innocents. Okay, so I don't know, how much Israelis believe that what they're doing to Gaza is helping the hostages. But it's not what the hostage families believe. They believe that what Israel is doing to Gaza is making their family members, their loved ones, those who are still alive, less safe. They believe that the way to get the hostages home now is to negotiate, is to have a ceasefire, to stop the killing right now. So what Israel is doing, Many Israelis may support it. They may fully believe in 10,000 eyes for an eye, 10,000 teeth for a tooth. They may believe that. They may believe it's okay for us to slaughter wholesale Gazan children and kill humanitarian aid workers and keep trucks from getting into Gaza. They may all believe that. They may even say this is what's good for our hostages. But it's not. They're just wrong. They're wrong, even if their only concern, and apparently it is, because look, the suffering of the civilians in Gaza shouldn't even be taken into account at all, according to Ruth Marcus. That's what many believe in Israel. Even if their only concern is the hostages, their actions are counterproductive or harmful, or making it worse. And that's what Marcus doesn't get. And that's where you, by the way, find the limitations, right? In any newspaper, is it's going to have a certain worldview, it's going to have a certain perspective. And the Washington Post, certainly not the New York Times, they don't present the view that Palestinians are human beings who deserve to have just as much of a decent life and security and safety as the Israelis do. Marcus finishes up, and I thought this was fascinating, what she talks about Israel. Existential loneliness. Few other countries have had to worry for so long and with such new intensity about their very survival. Few have felt so isolated in that enterprise. So I was like, really? Is that where you're going with this? Don't you think Gazans, if you want to, however you want to call it, the nation of Gaza, they've been worried for 60 years, 70 years about their survival, haven't they? 75 years, 70, whatever. Hasn't their survival been completely in doubt? And isn't it with renewed intensity since Israel began its merciless bombing campaign, with the threat that they may occupy with their army and go house to house, door to door? And in terms of being isolated, what is she talking about? The U.S., the most powerful nation in the world, after Israel committed, without question, atrocities against humanitarian aid workers, including an American citizen. An American citizen was murdered who was trying to provide aid to Gazans. And after that happened, the U.S. the Biden administration said, here's more weapons. How are they isolated? They may feel that way. I'm not denying it. But part of your job as a reporter, as a writer, as an op-ed, someone with a lot of power, someone who writes op-eds, like you, Ruth Marcus, is to say, I get this is how they feel, but the feelings aren't based on the reality. Israel's not isolated. The most powerful nation the world has ever seen is fully on board, is supporting their genocidal activities. And they're not at risk of being wiped out. They are, in fact, eradicating another country. So, I think this was a valid op-ed by Ruth Marcus. It's fine that she wants to put it in there, but the newspaper should have, and maybe it will, have, a counter viewpoint. I know the New York Times had a pretty good op-ed by a Palestinian recently. I can't remember what the whole, it was there can't be two-state solution. There has to be a one state, which is what I've been saying. All right, this program today isn't just about the Washington Post's headlines and stories in their A section today. This is a really important story. I actually learned, I'd been reading about this for a while, but Sabby Sabs did a real good program. I saw the video, and we're going to play some of it, where she plays a video of Annelle Sheline And by the way, I did not know that was how it was pronounced. I thought it was Annelle Sheline, but I believe it's Sheline based on how Amy Goodman and Democracy Now! Pronounce her name. She's a hero, no question. She's her hero for our times, Annelle Sheline. But I saw the Sabby Sabs where she played clips from the morning, or it's not Morning Joy, right? Joy Reid, Morning Joy. It's actually now called The Readout, I believe. I thought the Joy Reid interview was in many ways better than Democracy Now! So we'll play part of that. But you know what's interesting about the Joy Reid interview? I can't find it on MSNBC. I went everywhere to look for the original, but I couldn't find it. MSNBC has lots and lots of Joy Reid interviews. And it must have been in the past week because Sheline just resigned in the past week or 8 days ago. So MSNBC took it down, isn't putting it up there. Couldn't find it on YouTube anywhere except via Sabby Sabs. So I'm going to play you the Sabby Sabs. So it's going to be on the Hal Ginsberg show, Halitics. We'll have a video of Sabby Sabs playing video from Morning Joy, Joy Reid, Readout. But let's start with this interview on Democracy Now! And the question is, well, we're going to just jump right into it with Sheline.
I hadn't initially planned to resign publicly. I hadn't been at state for very long, and I didn't think it would necessarily matter. But I decided to go public because when I started to tell colleagues that I was planning to resign over Gaza, so many people's response was, please speak out, please speak for us. Many people are not in a position where they feel they could resign, or they are trying to do what they can on the inside. There's still a lot of important, crucial work the State Department does. And so I decided I would go ahead and go public.
All right, so let me stop it there well, actually, that's where she stopped it. So that makes sense that I was going to stop it there. I guess I had already in the original. We'll play more from it. But the point Sheline is making is, hey, I wasn't even going to do this in the newspapers. I was going to just simply, make my stand privately. I'd already told, and we'll hear more from her, I'd already talked to other folks there. But when my colleagues heard, they all are so upset, so outraged, so heartbroken at what's happening at state that they really felt we had to let our position be known. And I think that's right. And I think that's really important. So I'm glad Sheline did that. Let me play a little more though. And then because she explains to some more degree on Amy Goodman's show, Democracy Now!, why she resigned. But I really want to get to the Reid discussion as well, because I think it's even more instructive. So, and look, this is the point. This is why I have problems with, a Jimmy Dore, right? Who, and others of you who, if it's in corporate media, if it's reported by elites, you automatically just discount it 100%. Well, that just isn't the way things work. Even corrupt media now and then gets it right. And there's much that's corrupt about the Washington Post, but it does provide really, really valuable information we need. You have to be very, very careful. You have to sift through it. You have to say to yourself, is this view that's being presented here, is this being presented because it benefits the owner of the newspaper? Does it benefit the shareholders? Does it benefit the reporter to tell me this, to get me to believe this? Or does this really pass the smell test? Does this seem accurate? We have to be very, very active, savvy media consumers. But it doesn't mean we don't consume any media whatsoever except that which consistently tells us what we believe to be true, or we want it to be true.
Annelle, you told the Washington Post that you tried to raise concerns internally with dissent cables and at staff forums. So what was the result of that? And how are other people within state, as you said, trying to speak out within the State Department to change policy?
Yes, many people are extremely horrified by the U.S. government's position on this horrific conflict and the actions of both the Israeli and the U.S. governments. There is the dissent channel inside the State Department. I co-wrote a cable and signed other cables. There have been forums for State Department employees to speak out. I spoke with supervisors. I was able to speak with senior official about my resignation. I think at the end of the day, many people inside state know that this is a horrific policy and can't believe that the United States government is engaged in such actions that contravene American values so directly, but the leadership is not listening.
Yeah, so I thought that's very interesting. Below the top layer at state, the sentiment is this is horrible what we're doing. But the political appointees, the electeds, or their handpicked apparatchiks are like, no, full steam ahead. And there's a couple takeaways from that, and you know, she says this is just a horrible policy, and we know it's wrong. And she's going to elucidate a little bit of that with Joy Reid, which I want to get to. But I believe that, you know, a democracy is the way you should have government, and the people who run the government should be people who we elect. But we don't live in a democracy in the sense that there's some kind of free and unfettered selection of leadership. And the people who we elect are those who really represent our values, and that we really have very, very limited options. We don't have a winner. We don't have a majority ruler. In other words, the rule isn't the person who gets the most votes across the country is the winner. There are all sorts of gatekeepers who determine who gets to even, you know, be a legitimate candidate. And people, frankly, don't often make good decisions when their information is so skewed and is so limited in terms of what they learn about candidates. Most Americans don't support what Israel's doing. Most Americans would like to see us significantly reduce our military support for Israel and condition aid going forward. Now, I understand Americans do, by and large, feel more close to Israel than towards Palestine. But the policy that we're pursuing now cannot in any way be viewed as a democratic one with a small d. The people at state, the staffers, they understand what's going on, and they're horrified by it. The political appointees and the president are looking at slicing and dicing the population. What will cost us votes, what won't? What will cost us money? What will create ire from AIPAC? Hell of a democracy, huh? Not the way it should work. It's not the way it should work. But when Annelle Sheline goes on TV, then hopefully we're going to be listening and saying, no, this isn't what we want. We support policy like just too wrong. It's just too evil. So a little more from Sheline, which I actually, again, mentioned. I felt like Joy Reid got to the heart of what's wrong with what the State Department is doing in terms of its support for Israel and what Joe Biden is doing in terms of his support for Israel to a more complete degree, somewhat surprisingly, than Amy Goodman. It's weird, though, that this isn't available. At least I couldn't find it on YouTube or through MSNBC. They just have not made this public. Except maybe it was on one time and somebody videotaped it. Sabby Sabs, just to give full credit, she does thank one of her viewers for sending her the clip, and I guess maybe they just recorded it when it was live.
Department employees that feel the same way that she does, but they're not willing to, they're afraid, right? Again, this could be a career killer. So they actually, encouraged her to come forward about this publicly. So I think that speaks volumes, and it makes me wonder if we're going to hear from more state employees from the State Department come forward as well.
Having been at state, what about your experience there? What have you seen from the inside that you objected to so strongly that you felt you couldn't work there anymore?
In particular, it was that we are not upholding U.S. laws, that there are laws against providing weapons to government.
All right, I'm going to just stop it there for a sec. That was a great question. That really wasn't a question that I didn't watch. I did pretty much watch the entire Amy Goodman interview. And the question was, well, what was so horrible about what was happening? Say, what was the worst thing? And she says, because we weren't upholding the law, we were violating the law. In other words, whether you call the policy of supporting Israel through its murderous rampage in Gaza, whether you call it immoral, wrong-headed, misguided, evil, Sheline is saying, hey, it's illegal. There's laws that say we shouldn't be doing this. We can't do this.
Governments that commit gross violations of human rights and that block U.S. humanitarian aid, that these laws are not being upheld. And I think this is not only having obviously a devastating effect on the people of Gaza, but this is also devastating for America, for this administration, which came in claiming to want to reestablish America's moral leadership in the world, claiming to uphold the rule of law, the liberal international order. So, I think for myself and for other colleagues who believe in the mission of the State Department and believe in the values that America claims to uphold, these decisions became untenable to stay with this administration.
All right, so very, very powerful stuff. And we're going to hear just a little bit more. I jumped forward because, she had some more really important stuff in there I want to get to. So here's just a little more with Annelle Sheline, former State Department staffer who resigned as a protest against the U.S. support of Israeli genocide in Gaza. Here's Annelle Sheline on Joy Reid program Readout.
So, I think for myself and for other colleagues who believe in the mission of the State Department and believe in the values that America claims to uphold, these decisions became untenable to stay with this administration.
Notice again, she stresses with this administration. So it's really interesting. She's not holding back here and holding the Biden administration.
All right, so I'll just stop because we don't need to hear Sabi's take on it. But she does there's a little more in here, which is really important. This goes to the question of, well, what about some of the good stuff? Isn't there some good stuff that Biden's doing? Shouldn't we also recognize that? And so let's hear what Sheline has to say. So let's see if we can get that up here for you. Because I was really interested as well in this question, which was another really good question by Joy Reid. I hope I get it at the right spot. I think I
did. The changes in the Biden administration's position, including abstaining and allowing a UN resolution to go through, which did call for a ceasefire, and having the ship docked off of Gaza, providing food, airdropping food. Did those changes and shifts in the Biden administration's position impact your decision at all? And what do you make of them?
Well, I welcome.
Let me just stop it. That's just such a great question, right? Because she's saying, hey, I get it. We've been supporting Israel. It's really bad. And it's a really good question for a couple of reasons, but specifically with respect to Sheline. Sheline's resigned after Biden gave his speech. He said, we're going to build this port. We're going to have a pier. We're going to bring, food and supplies and help the Gazans. So Joy is saying, well, hey, doesn't that make a difference, right, for you? And so it's a great question, but it's also a great question for the American people. Because we have to make a decision whom to vote for, if anybody, in our primaries and in November. So if we're aghast, if we're horrified by what Israel's doing, and we're thinking we need to stop, we need to help, we need to do something different, then how do we react? That's the question Reed is asking. How should we react to what Joe Biden has announced? And I've struggled with that very question. I've said, hey, maybe Biden, right, like as bad as Biden is, would Trump be even worse? Maybe, remember what Jenks said, hey, we know what we're getting with Biden, but with Trump we might get a lot worse. And my response was, well, how could it be worse, right? It couldn't be worse. And Sheline will address that. But it's a great question because we have to make our decisions for whom to vote. And I know a lot of you are like, well, I'm voting for Biden because anyone but Trump, right? Any blue will do. I don't know how you can say that when you have a president who's supporting genocide. I don't know how you can say any blue will do under those circumstances when the blue is the one who right now is supporting genocide. And also endless war in Ukraine, and also energy policy that has led to more fossil fuels extracted, at least in terms of oil and gas, in his administration than in any other previous one. All right, here we go.
Policy has not changed. The U.S. continues to fast track massive amounts of weapons to Israel, and they're not using American leverage to insist that aid get in through ground routes. A plane can carry 2 to 3 tons of aid, and a single truck can carry 20 tons. And there are hundreds of trucks waiting at the border to get food and medicine to these people. The pier that the administration is building.
So what she's saying there is we're getting all the weapons to Israel, period. And we're not conditioning it on even allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza, right? The humanitarian aid is stalled at the borders on the Egypt line, on the Israeli side. But there's because of Israel. Because Israel's going through every single truck with a fine-tooth comb to make sure there couldn't possibly be anything that might be a weapon, right? And it's delaying. It's enormous delays, and then they take a break, and the food doesn't get through, or it goes rotten. And then when it does go through, people are so hungry that they riot, and then Israel shoots on them. And Sheline is saying, these are all these horrible delays imposed by Israel on providing a lifeline, but there's no delays whatsoever when it comes to the bombs and the artillery shells and the bullets that we are supplying Israel.
Is largely a PR stunt. They are now dealing with a lot more public pressure on this.
All right, so Annelle Sheline and that outstanding work by Joy Reid completely destroys any argument, maybe Trump would be even worse, because you couldn't be worse than what Biden's doing. And just again, no change in U.S. policy. No change in U.S. Now, maybe that will change. Maybe the meeting with Bibi will lead either Israel to modify its murderous actions, or maybe it will cause Biden to get so pissed off he'll say, forget it, no more guns, no more bombs, no more shells. Since I did that long analysis and in-depth look into Annelle Sheline and a couple of interviews by the Democracy Now! And also by Joy Reid. I wanted to look at what newspapers how they've covered it. But before we do that, I just really, one last thing. I do want to just, maybe one more snippet here. This is going to be from Democracy Now! This kind of elucidates the point that there's been no change. And it really shows, again, how arrogant, how dismissive this administration is, and how fundamentally dishonest the Joe Biden administration is when it comes to Gaza.
I want to go to the State Department spokesperson, Matt Miller, being questioned by a reporter about the internal dissent channel within the State Department and employees raising concerns over the policies.
What is
right.
the point
So let me just stop it. So Sheline, just to get back to that for a second, Sheline had said, you know, I did make my displeasure known through the dissent channel at the State Department. And so do many other staffers, right, who feel exactly the same way, that the policy that we're pursuing is wrong. It's misguided, it's illegal, it's immoral. And so now there's a question to Matt Miller of the State Department and spokes Flack there. Let's see what he has to say.
The whole channel, and like, I mean, the secretary listens, and we've all reported about various listening sessions between mid-level or like more senior officials with the secretary, more junior officials. If it's not, if it's being heard, but if it's not taken into account in the policy at all, then don't you think it's a little bit pointless?
So I would disagree with that completely. It is taken into account in the policymaking process.
Look, he's really getting pissed off. He's like angry. He doesn't like being questioned. He doesn't like the fact that he has to defend a policy that he knows is indefensible. Doesn't care. Just doesn't want to have to answer questions. You can see he's got his hair slicked back, but his lips are sort of curling down. He's like, how dare you question what we're doing? And who are these staffers to be complaining either? And yes, we listen. Yes, we listen.
Things in those meetings that he takes on board and that influence his thinking and that he brings to bear in making policy decisions. Now, if what you mean is, are we going to execute a complete reversal of the policy we implemented?
Well, he's just making, just like it's a straw argument, right? Oh, well, if you're saying we have to completely change our policy, well, we're not going to do that. Well, and my answer is, why wouldn't you anyway? Your policy is just fundamentally wrong. It's illegal, and it's immoral. It's illegal. Why wouldn't you change it?
Are we going to implement exactly some of the policies that the people in these meetings have called for? That's not how. Hold on. That's not how this process works. That's not how government works.
No, I don't think that's anyone's expectation.
That's not how any organization works. I dare say any of the media organizations in this room, if reporters go to their bosses and offer feedback, and the bosses say, "Well, that's a good point. We're going to take that to bear." But on the larger policy, this is the decision that we have made.
That's right. That's right. Reporters don't make the decision. That's something you should know when you read your newspaper, when you watch TV. Is that ultimately what you watch, what you see, is what the owners want you to watch and see. And they're rich and powerful, almost certainly much richer and much more powerful than you are. So that's something you always have to bear in mind. No question about it. But even reporters, their elites, their education level, their interests, their values are often very, very different. Sometimes I might agree with their values more than I do with many of the people who watch TV, news consumers, media consumers. I might agree with the reporters in many cases, but it's important to understand, of course, that what we read, what we see is filtered first by journalists who are, have fundamentally different interests and values than many of us do, and then by owners who have very, very, very different financial interests than almost everybody.
You're doing a long rant on something that I didn't suggest, but do you have any examples on, any changes? I'm genuinely curious.
Yeah, I will say with respect to any number of issues, with respect to the delivery of humanitarian assistance, we have heard good ideas from people inside the building who have come and
how come it's not getting through? Because we just heard from Annelle Sheline that humanitarian assistance isn't getting through. The Gazans are starving. Children are dying. So how good was that help? That, those suggestions, were they really implemented?
Feedback, and we have implemented those. So, now there are people that when you say if the idea is that to the United States to cut off support for Israel, that's just a fundamental policy disagreement. So when you see people who offer interviews that say we want the United States to stop supporting Israel's right to defend itself, that's not.
So that's just a lie right there. No one says Israel shouldn't be allowed to defend itself. What we're saying is we shouldn't be supporting Israel's right to eradicate millions of people, that it's kept in a open-air concentration camp for 25 years. That's what we're saying. We're saying the United States shouldn't be providing the guns and the bombs and the shells that are being used to systematically wipe out a group of people. We're not saying Israel shouldn't be allowed to defend itself. They want to defend themselves, fine. Then they should have done a police investigation into what happened on October 7th. They should have gone to the United Nations. They should have gone to Hamas and said, hey, you killed a lot of our people. You took others hostage. What are we going to do to get them free? What are you going to do? We want the people responsible, the perpetrators, to be held responsible, to be prosecuted for crimes. That's how you defend yourself. You don't engage in an orgy of bloodshed against population that's impoverished, that is barely able to survive as it is because of what you're doing to them. So it's just a complete BS what that guy is saying, and I've had enough of him, so we're going to move on. How is the story of Annelle Sheline covered? Well, I've been talking about the Washington Post, so here's the headline. This was March last month, they published. Here's the headline. State Department Human Rights staffer quits over Biden's Gaza policy. Seems pretty straightforward. That's accurate. Let's go to New York. What about the New York media? I talk a lot about the New York Times. Let's see how did they cover this story? Because I know a lot of you think Times is the be-all and end-all, and if it's in the New York Times, it's true, and if it's not, it isn't true. So let's find out. Well, that's New York, but it's the New York Post. March 29, another State Department official resigns over Biden's horrific support for Israel's war against Hamas. So I don't think it's a war. I don't like the term war. It's not a war. It's a fish fry. I don't know what you use, some sort of shooting, fish in a barrel, something of that sort. It's not a war. That's not the New York Times. A lot of you just turn up your noses at the New York Post. It's nothing. It's Ramos's people in the outer boroughs read it. It's Staten Island, Queens, what have you. But they cover the story. The New York Times did not cover the story. They did not tell you. If that's your primary source of news, you might not know. You could read the New York Times cover to cover every day for the past 2 weeks. You would not know that within the State Department, there's deep, deep discontent, happiness over the Biden administration policy supporting Israel. You wouldn't know that. You should know that. Absolutely know that. All right, last story. It is the free-for-all, so I try to go back to stories I had covered earlier in the week. And yesterday, I believe, was my eclipse program. So I told you we're going to cover what was in today's Washington Post, and that says April 4th, but it's in the paper edition that was delivered this morning to my house. And this is the A section, so I thought I would share it with you. It's about the eclipse. Solar eclipses can make their own weather. Here's how. Reduction in incoming sunlight has significant effects on the atmosphere. You can feel and you can see. So what are those effects? Real quick, I'm not going to go through it in specific, but there are 5 headlines. Let's see if we can kind of make it a little bigger. I think you can read them anyway. But first of all, and unsurprisingly, the temperature drops. Yes, when the sun goes down, it gets colder, right? I mean, the sun is our source of heat, energy. If the sun is not to be found in the sky, it will get colder. So that's the first impact. Clouds disappear. That is interesting. I guess that's a function of the colder temperature. And I don't quite understand that because relative humidity increases. I thought when there's more humidity, you might get more clouds. Now, the humidity increases relatively because colder air has lower capacity to, its water carrying capacity drops. So if the same amount of moisture is in the air, but the temperature is 5 or 10 degrees colder, the same amount of water will be clammier. It'll be more humidity. I guess there's the clouds disappear because the water precipitates, maybe in the form of mist or something of that nature, and so therefore you don't see the clouds. Yes, I don't really know. Winds change, yeah, because usually I guess you have winds that generally go from where there's higher energy, which is warm weather, warmer air, to colder air, although it's very simplistic. I'm not really, again, but there's all change is all due to the temperature drop. And then the upper atmosphere is disturbed. And they went into this whole thing about electrical impulses in the sky that I didn't really understand. But, and I didn't spend too much time trying to because I had to get ready for today's program. That's going to do it. Those are your changes. You want to learn more about the eclipse and its impacts, go back and go look at the New York Washington Post article or somewhere else. And you have a great weekend. I'll be back on Monday. It'll be an Arlen Monday. We will talk, I guess, about the eclipse, although I don't think it's going to be evident in California at all. So he may not care.